Okay, and uh, boom. According to that, I am live. Just suddenly worried now. Do I have sound? I do have sound. There is the sound. I see it there. Here is my setup. Okay, I'm using Twitter from the iPad this time instead of the internet just because I discovered last week that the tweets that I show, stories that I've covered this week, there is a limit to how much I can actually see on the new web version of Twitter, I guess. Yeah, they're having trouble paying the bills, so saving money, I guess, by not letting me scroll through that. How is everyone doing? Hope you're doing well. It sounds like if you're in the northern hemisphere anywhere in the world, you probably, whether you're in Europe or America or here in Japan, you're dealing with heat at the moment. Today was another hot day. We've had a few days get up to like 38. Even in Hachioji, which is a far western part of Tokyo, where I actually originally lived in Tokyo, got up above 39 degrees. And it's unusual for it to get actually that hot because with the humidity, it just sort of tops out and it sort of can't go any higher. I think Japan's only ever made it, anywhere in Japan's only made it above 40 degrees once or twice. How much that is in Fahrenheit, I'm not exactly sure, but it was up to 38 degrees the other day, and we've got 2 or 3 days of heat like that, 37 degrees every day. So, pretty extreme here. Of course, some people in the southern hemisphere, which where I grew up in New Zealand, was talking to Dad today. Typical miserable rainy winter in New Zealand at the moment. But yeah, wherever you're tuning in from in the world, thank you for joining. Good to see everybody. We've got 7 current viewers and a couple of people already there in the comments. Jack H asking, how have I been finding dealing with the heat recently? Here the weather's been off, but that's the UK for you. Yeah, actually, I've heard it's been like raining more in the UK. And in Japan, it's been more, yeah, sort of the rest of Europe, it's been hot. So that's definitely a thing that's been going on. In terms of how have I been finding it, it was a bit of a shock coming back from Seattle, where it's just the heat and humidity are both pretty intense, and it was an adaptation coming back. During the week, I went for a really soft run in the evening. In fact, no, the first one was in the morning, which I thought would be okay, but the problem is because of the time zone, as well as the lack of daylight saving time, the sun comes up here at the moment at something like 4 o'clock, which means it's already pretty hot by like 7 or 8 o'clock. And I'm not at wake up at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock type of a person. So I did run at 8 o'clock on a day when it was sort of manageable. Then I thought I'd run in the middle of the day, and that was a mistake. In fact, although I only ran 6 kilometers, I had to stop partway through and go into a convenience store with air conditioning and get a cold drink and hold it under my armpits to cool myself off. I did run the rest of the way back, but I had to stop twice at a vending machine later on as well. So pretty much confirmed, especially not being acclimatized at the moment. It's pretty much too dangerous to run during the day at the moment, especially if you're not adapted like me. And the fact that, I have now I've had things like kidney stones when I was in America, which is almost certainly due to dehydration, but it's a reflection I need to probably be a little bit more careful with that sort of thing. So I went for another run, actually, and another couple of runs in the evening. Actually, I went for one yesterday and I actually ran a really good pace. But yeah, just trying to cope by not overdoing it, by drinking tons of water and just not going outside. That's the thing about summer. Any other time of the year in Japan, even when it's cold, you can still do things. But when it's like this at the moment, you just can't go outside. You can't do anything outside. You can't go anywhere. So that sort of is why summer truly is the worst season in Japan, because you're kind of trapped indoors. So yeah, anyway, I've been dealing with it, but that's where I'm at. Anyway, nice to see so many people already rocking. And we've got Eric Bailey was here first. Good, so that we can start now. Got Jack H. Good to see you, Jack H. We've got Tai Nakamura. Good to see you, Tai Naka. Ohio, indeed. Early morning for you. We've got Ben Duncan. Yo, good to see you. And for everybody, if you want to get my attention with a comment, like if you want me to answer a question or just talk about a topic that you want me to talk about or anything like that, do what Jack H did. Just say my name and you can see what happens. It flashes up orange just automatically for me. And I'll pay particular attention to comments that flash up orange as something which is being directed at me. And yeah, crank up the aircon indeed. Grandkids will be fine. They'll figure out this whole environment thing someday. What's kind of funny, because the news in Japan has been like at the same time. It still is rainy season in Japan, which is the time of the year when there's just a really intense tropical sort of low pressure system. Just a front just gets parked over Japan, and normally it would even be parked over Tokyo still. But it's just slightly out of sync this year where it's sitting on the west side of Honshu. So it's raining a lot over in Niigata, but in Tokyo it's been dry and hot and sunny. And in Kyushu and Akita, are those two places, it's been really intense rains and floods. So we've had this thing where, just like in Korea as well, there's been really heavy flooding. We've got like record-breaking rains. Like one day there was something like 450 millimeters, like 45 centimeters, which is what 12 inches is 30 centimeters. So that's like 18 inches of rain in a day in one town in Kyushu. So we're having these really intense rain days and heat days happening at the same time. And both causing problems, and happening everywhere else as well. So that's indeed a thing, and hopefully the kids will be able to figure out the environment thing. The thing is that we're dealing with a problem that's really multi-generational to fix, and because it takes such a long time to fix, nobody has the attention span to be able to come up with a good policy to actually do what's necessary to reduce human-triggered climate change. And so, frankly, even if we do come up with a solution for it, whether we can stick to it is a question. And in any case, we still have to deal with it in the meantime, which is that we have to, it's becoming increasingly clear that maybe, a lot of places in Japan have to build cities now, perhaps like they build them in Singapore, where everything is connected through air-conditioned underground, and you just give up on going outside during most of the summer, and indeed for the flooding as well. When you just know that there's going to be these intense flash floods in all these places in Japan. Tokyo, of course, has addressed the problem of flash flooding that it always had. Tokyo is a city built on canals and rivers, and they used to have the same problem. Every rainy season, there would be intense floods around Tokyo, and they resolved it with this incredible drainage system around Tokyo, which you can even go and see as a tourist site in Saitama called the Cathedral. It's just like I don't know how many stories. It's like a 10-story high, like pipe underground, which can just basically handle a large river just to divert any sort of flood away from Tokyo. And it's flooding was still a problem even when I got to Tokyo in the late 90s. There were still regular floods in places like Nakano and Western Tokyo. And those have been addressed, but perhaps this is something we now have to do like nationwide. I mean, again, I think, just giving up on going outside in summer and building the means to deal with intense floods in the short term, it looks like we can't really stop those things from happening anymore. And this is something that a lot of other countries, and hell, maybe we need to spend that money to realize the cost of inaction, which is pretty much the problem that we're dealing with right now. So yeah, indeed, I hope they figure it out, but we'll see. Jack H comments, it's glad to see being able to run a bit despite the heat, and me too. I got really fit when I was in Seattle, so I want to keep that going. Thing about Seattle is that the gyms, you do tons of conditioning as well. Like they're all like, boot camp type. You're doing lots of sit-ups and press-ups and stuff, which in Japan, at least at the gym that I go to, I went back to Muay Thai this week as well. I signed up for that, and it's cool and it's fun. But you just stretch and start hitting things. There's no conditioning, which in a way, it meant that it took me 2 months. You'd have to do 200 sit-ups at the end of every workout, as well as like half an hour of pretty intense conditioning at the start of every workout that I did in Seattle. And it took me a couple of months before I could do it. I must admit, I can sort of feel already I'm probably losing that. It's easier, it's good, but yeah. So I'm adapting to it all. And 270 AJ asks, hope I'm well. Do I do strength training or is it only running? It really is only running, and that's just me. The strength training stuff, I was doing it in America because I was going to, Muay Thai, which is very aerobic, but they were combining that with a lot of strength training. And it's why Americans who work out all look like they've got these enormous upper bodies and stuff. It's because they do all the strength training stuff. I don't really do that, honestly. I do press-ups myself at home. I've stopped doing sit-ups, and I feel like I should do them so I don't lose what I've built up. But yeah, pretty much the only strength training I do is just hitting bags. So yeah, I just don't. I psychologically, I start getting bored really quickly when I'm working on like machines or lifting weights. I like running because it's just like going for a walk. It's like sightseeing. And Tokyo is great for that, and the sense of progress and everything. So I just do sports that I enjoy. I enjoy Muay Thai and I enjoy, running just because it's physical things. But yeah, um, uh, so pretty much only running, honestly, although I feel like I should do something more about that anyway to get back into it. Eric Bailey, most experts you've read seem to think it's too late for the climate change thing. A few scientists that are past shouting and are already prepping, and that's kind of where I must admit. I mean, so I in my law degree, I actually specialized in IT law and international environmental law back in 1997, the year that the Kyoto Protocol was signed. And I was convinced that the need for comprehensive global action, that the case for global warming, I mean now they call it climate change, was so overwhelming at the time that this was just going to be something everyone was going to have to deal with, and it would be good to be ahead of the curve on knowing the law and the policies relating to it. And the need is still there, but I think you're right that the attention span of most democracies, in particular, just isn't sufficient. I think it's one of the problems where I don't mean to single out America on this. I think every country's been bad. Australia's been worse than America on this, actually. But when you've got a country that has an election cycle that takes 18 months, out of every 4 years, like elections should just take 30 days wherever they are. People get bored and they start looking for extreme stuff and populist. I'm pretty sure, in a shorter election window, you wouldn't get radical candidates doing as well. But people get bored, in 18 months, people say, hey, yeah, maybe climate change isn't real. And I think it makes it politically really tough. I mean, it's politically tough as it is, let alone when you've got an 18-month cycle where bored conspiracy theorists have enough time to actually take over. And this is happening in most democracies right now. So I agree. I think actual scientists who are not like, red pillar, talk show hosts or paid lobbyists going against it, which is pretty much all scientists are agreed on this. And yeah, that's right. I think we're pivoting, going to need to pivot to accepting that some places are just not going to be livable anymore. And you can certainly feel it at this time of year in the Northern Hemisphere when you see all the weather warnings happening right now. Or at least we're going to have to live very differently. And yeah, I can see that. So yeah, Eric Bailey says, try some bands. They are super exciting because they never know, because you never know when they'll snap and smack you somewhere unexpected. Oh, you mean the exercise bands? They had those in Seattle. They have those at the gyms. The gyms in Seattle are all these intense boot camp type workout things. And actually, I think I did one workout with those. Yeah, screw that. I don't know. I was feeling guilty actually doing Muay Thai the other day, not doing like 10 minutes of jump rope and press ups before starting, but hell, it was fun. Also, just it's different. You're working with Thai trainers who are former pros, so you can just start hitting hard right away. Whereas in Seattle, we were training with each other, so you always were being kind of careful, although that was also really fun. But yeah, I know I should get into some stuff. In terms of what else is going on, the big news this week is our wonderful moderator, Erin, is currently doing a bit of a family trip through Japan, and I was able to catch her for about an hour for lunch the other day. It was wonderful to meet in person. Yeah, she was, some people are very different to what you expect when you meet them in person, and some people are exactly, and Erin is exactly what I was expecting. So yeah, that was really great. Yeah, nice to see her. I'll hopefully get her back on another trip to Japan sometime. But yeah, so that was cool. Other than that, yeah, pretty much just getting back into the swing of Japan. I did feel a little bit of reverse culture shock when I got here. I think I talked about that last week. I think that's settling down. I am enjoying not having to wear masks everywhere, particularly when running. I feel like that's eased up quite a lot. But that said, yeah, summer here just sucks. It's just going to be 3 months of that. So, getting back into it. Speaking of which, perhaps in reverse order, let's see if I can go back 7 days and do this from the start of the week backwards. Oh, are you doing this to me again? Come on, don't do that. Don't do that. Wait. Okay, so if I go to the home feed and then I go to this feed, I should be able to. Oh, come on. Come on. This was happening on the web the other day. Let me just check. I might switch to my iPhone. See, the iPhone doesn't do that. Ah, Okay. Give me a sec. I am going to take drastic action on this because otherwise I can't do the show. So, boom. And this is not going to fit on the screen as a result of this, but it's going to be a skinny screen. But let's have a look. Let's put that there. It's going to be a little bit narrow. I guess I can make it bigger as a result. Whoops. It's not. Okay. Technical issues. There are no technical issues. Let's expand. Come on. Or not. It won't let me do that. So I'm just going to pop that in the middle. Okay, we'll just do it this way. This is cool. So let's see if we can go back 7 days. That's 3 days. Let's see what's been happening this week. The rocket explosion, it is on my list. I mean, there isn't much to it, but I did tweet about it, so it is going to be on the list, Dan H. Good to see you, Dan H, by the way. By the way, thanks again. I've got to say, I think I already mentioned this before, but the After Dinner with Sade podcast, I really enjoyed. I actually had a friend from work who I think has some Lebanese heritage as well, Australian guy, probably. Hell, you might even know him, but he's working in America. I recommended it to him. I was like, hey, dude, I'm listening to this cool Lebanese podcast, and it's been really good. I've listened to a bunch of episodes. He seemed impressed. And it was a really great podcast, so I was happy to recommend it. Andrew Momboy, good to see you. A long time no see indeed. It was hard to join, of course, for the time zone with the US and Australia time differences, and people have normal jobs. So yeah, indeed, good to be back, and good to see you back. So 7-9, I think 7 days. So I think we're getting around here. Okay, let's start from here. Going back 7 days. Wingstar, good to see you, Wingstar. Good morning. Wow, great to see the crowd back. Now that we're back in the same old time zone, I guess that makes it a lot easier for people. So there you go. I do feel very self-conscious about highlighting the absurd number of tweets that I have done. Can I move that out of screen? I don't think I can. I think it's fixed there at the top. Okay, so this is just highlighting. I've tweeted 122,500 times. That's a lot of times to say I'm taking a crap. So how's the butter stocks going? The butter stocks are good. I'm all stocked up at the moment. So yeah, and you know what? The Japanese butter is good. I'm enjoying it. Next time, go to New Jersey. You know what? Next time, I'll certainly be going to Virginia and New York next time. And from what I understand, New Jersey should be like doable, drivable, at least from New York, probably. I don't know how drivable it would be from like Arlington. But yeah, that's where I would be anyway. Yeah, this is the tweet number of someone with far too much spare time on their hands. But as a result, I have a show. In fact, actually, if I go, oh, there's the show last week. Dodom, back in Japan. There is the live stream. So first one, Georgia, Spoon and Tamago. Check it out. So last week they did the, oh God, what do they call it again? They call it, I'm blacking out. But anyway, they do a thing where they simulate the glowflies, or sort of going down the river, where they put all these LEDs into the river, and someone took a time lapse of it. This is in Osaka, and it's a really, really cool photo. Just for those people who are worried, as I was worried, that apparently they do actually collect the LEDs downriver so that they don't actually turn into pollution. So that was really, really cool. Tanabata. What am I talking about? Why did I forget Tanabata? But anyway, which is simulating the Milky Way. Anyway, so that was something pretty cool if you're in Osaka. Kind of funny. There's a story here which is kind of consistent with one thing I've realized this week. It's really hit me more and more. Japanese are eating more and more bread, and they're eating rice less often. And you know why? Well, bread is easier. You don't have to heat up, with rice. Even when it's like ready to go off, and you have to at least microwave it. And microwavable rice, there's actually like the sato rice, which you just microwave for a minute, and it's like really pretty good quality. But normally, like traditional rice, you have to wash, you have to scrub it, you have to boil it. And boiling it in the pot's really hard as well. So, the rice cookers are pretty good at it, but, then there's a lot of cleaning up. Whereas just getting some bread is a lot easier. And that difference is not lost on Japanese. I think this is reflective of the fact that while this is something when I first got to Japan in, late 90s, early 2000s, the only bread shops were Japanese bread shops where all the bread was very sugary. It almost tasted like cake. And it was one of these things that I think people used to talk about how the people just wanted regular sandwich bread without, that didn't like add sugar to whatever they were eating in terms of flavor. It was really hard to get crusty bread or French bread. There were a couple of like Vie de France. There's a couple of sort of chains that have been around for longer that have French sticks and so on. But most often it was kind of the sweet, soft bread is what people associated with Japanese bread. But fact is, I think as Japanese eat bread more, particularly around Tokyo anyway, there's been more and more of these sort of particularly French bread shops pop up, like Poles, for example. Um, and coming back to Tokyo, I was kind of disappointed that there weren't more bread bakeries around in downtown Seattle. And I'm finding that there's a lot of bread shops and an increasing number of good quality bread shops around Tokyo. And this is probably reflective of the fact that Japanese are eating bread more and more as well. So it's something I've found since coming back is that actually it's kind of funny. Things I did not expect to be better. Things I was expecting would be better food-wise in America. Definitely I was expecting better bread. And that's not the case. I think Tokyo has better bread shops than than at least where I was in America, than Seattle and West Coast. And I'm also finding better hamburgers. I went back to Naughty by Burger the other day, which is a place I was talking about before I went away. And I've been to had a couple of other burgers this week. And I must say that if you go to a dedicated, like non-chain, like burger restaurant, like not Freshness Burger or Moss Burger, but like to burger restaurants, when Japanese people decide to do burgers, I think they do a better job. So yeah, those things. Yeah, I think that the bread option, something I've been eating a lot of since I got back, is I just like going up at lunchtime and getting 3 or 4 different types of bread and going back to my desk and eating. You actually get really great bread options now. So that's something I've noticed anyway coming back. That's right. Bread leads to more butter. That's right. The perilous slide to the dark side. But there we go. Eric Bailey's been searching in Saitama for 10 years now, trying to find decent rice, still looking. Well, in Tokyo anyway, you can find more options. If you're I'm pretty sure in Omiya you must be able to get something. I don't know. And maybe not so much rye, but you will get crusty bread. You will get white bread. But yeah, no, I actually find there are some good, like even regular, like thick slice rye breads that I like anyway. Maybe I'm easy to please. That's another possibility. Um, yeah. Sendai Ben, another great Twitter account to follow, just talking about how there are so many. This is responding to a tweet that I was doing, how people just seem to be throwing the word AI out, like they're going to look into ways of doing work better and using AI. It's just like being used like a buzzword where local governments are announcing it, companies are announcing it. Whenever you say the words AI, it seems to boost like share price and whatever. But clearly, a lot of people are just using it without really understanding what it is. And Sendai Ben there seems to be agreeing with me that they're seeing the same thing. The wastewater discharge, that's been a big topic this week. I think I'll go on a little bit later because there's been maybe an interesting contrast where usually the biggest troll of Japanese policy on this would be Korea trolling Japan. And this is a thing. Remember, Fukushima's on the Pacific side of Japan. So Korea is relatively sheltered by the Japanese archipelago from anything being released into the Pacific coming round into Korea. And in fact, what they're afraid of, this wastewater, what it contains is tritium. It's treated to reduce the contaminants in it, but it does have a high degree of tritium, which is a byproduct of cooling nuclear facilities. South Korea and China have a bunch of nuclear power plants that themselves cool with seawater that they emit into the oceans around their countries in higher volumes annually than is going to be released over the next 10 years from Fukushima. So, while people are kind of falling into a panic, there is a bit of a sort of a tabloid-driven panic in Korea that this is going to, poison the ocean in Korea. Truth is, they're already poisoning their own oceans much more than Fukushima is, if they even consider that poisoning, which the IAEA and the nuclear power plant operators in China and South Korea, of course, they consider it safe and they do it. But, for Japan, it's different. Perhaps if I was going to concede anything, they're suggesting that perhaps the water isn't being treated and Japan is just pumping untreated nuclear waste into the ocean. That's the way that they're interpreting it. But that doesn't line up with the supervised process that Japan is doing, the ALPS process to treat the water. But interesting, when you talk about how hard the Korean current conservative government is trying to mend relations with Japan, they accepted the IEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency findings endorsing Japan's plan for releasing the water. The politicians in this article that are berating the IAEA chief who visited Korea are opposition politicians who are basically, of course, trying to score points off the government for accepting the IAEA plan. And this is what I'm kind of afraid of with Korea, is that while I do think it's great that the South Korean government's trying so hard to resolve every open issue with Japan, including the war, the comfort women, the war labor issues, as well as the wastewater issue and whatever, and try to set things back so that Japan and Korea can basically normalize relations again, because Japan more or less just cut off relations with Korea. They degraded the status of the embassy over in Korea in spite of all the trade and all the personal ties. They really did just say that, okay, we're done, we're not talking to you anymore. And even when South Korea said, we want to be friends again, Japan was like, well, let's go really slow on this. And South Korea's been trying really hard. What I fear is that the blowback for the South Korean government trying so hard is going to be really intense when when this pivots and goes back into the left-wing opposition in power. But that's one thing. The other side, of course, is that China and Hong Kong seemingly taking the torch from China in terms of basically retaliating by instituting restrictions. In fact, apparently like a ban and increased testing on all Japanese food and a ban on all Japanese seafood is pretty much just trolling and trying to exploit this for propaganda value from China's perspective. Although it also looks like retaliation for Japan joining U.S. sanctions on semiconductor materials, which China needs, is my read on the Chinese retaliation over the Fukushima wastewater emission. I did get a little bit of flack. I commented that some of the international coverage, like the BBC coverage of the Fukushima thing, said fear. The headline was "Fear and Anxiety in Korea and China over Japanese, nuclear, wastewater emission." And while they do mention that the IAEA has endorsed the plan as safe, which really, you'd think that should arguably be the headline, although it's not as interesting as fear and anxiety. Even news sources were sort of playing up where you could argue that the role of the news media here should be to alleviate the fear and anxiety with science and data and information, and leading with that as the information. I think that the attitude of a lot of Western news, including the BBC over this, was that this is someone else's problem. So rather than being responsible about, leading with being science-oriented news and leading with facts, and then highlighting that there are concerns and, talking about, well, there's still need for messaging and education around this, the headline is the fear and anxiety. And I think what frustrated me is that if this was happening in the UK, that they wouldn't be highlighting the fear and panic over it first. Indeed, if it's something close to home, like, for example, COVID vaccines, there was plenty of fear and anxiety about COVID vaccines. But did the BBC ever lead with headlines of fear and anxiety over COVID vaccines? They lead with stories that these are, they led with the government line on these things because it was the socially, and publicly responsible thing to lead with the science on them first. And actually a lot of media, people who are anti-vax were critical of news media for not, for siding with the government-funded scientists and not leading with their fear and anxiety, which was a story. But, when it's about a Japanese wastewater reaction, all of a sudden, to me, it reads like anti-vax type news. And when I called the BBC out for that, some people said, well, they put the science in the article. But yeah, but they knew what they were doing with that headline, and it kind of annoyed me, particularly when in the case of China, I think it's pure propaganda. So that was the thing that was happening. More people in the chat at the moment. I see we've got John Carlo Lanoy. Good to see you. Hi, indeed. Welcome, man from Philippines. We've got Kustos, also good to see you. Hello, indeed. Eric Bailey commenting on the bread situation. Yes, French bread is easy to come by, but sourdough and rye are rare outside of Tokyo. And I'll admit, even in Tokyo, if you're looking specifically for like gluten-free or sourdough, yeah, you have to look for that a little bit. But still, I still find bread bakeries easy to come by here anyway. But you're right that if you're into those sort of specific, particularly from a baked bakery, yeah, you'll have to look a little bit for rye. Although, yeah, you can find them, but you've got to know where to go. So agree on that. Going back up, what was happening? Yeah, yeah, feels like 40 degrees. This heat index is a good way of showing it because even when it's like 35 degrees or 32 degrees, the humidity just amplifies the heat here so much. And remember, most of Tokyo, unfortunately, is all just concrete and no trees. There's no shade, so the heat radiates and the humidity amplifies it. It's like being in a really is like being in a sauna. It's really almost hard to breathe. So it's been kind of crazy. And this is how it was earlier this week. And yeah, um, that was a day I went for a 5K, and there was actual danger warnings out for Tokyo. Don't go outside. So yeah. Oh, and this is where I mentioned about the burgers. How yeah, it's actually this is me coming to the realization this week that I think Tokyo actually has better hamburgers than Seattle does. Particularly, Seattle people tell you that Dick's drive-through is like the famous burger. So California people tell you the In-N-Out burger is the go-to burger, and I had an In-N-Out burger, and it was good. I mean, it wasn't great, but if I'm comparing it to McDonald's or or Shake Shack or more sort of those sort of fast food type places, it was okay. But in Seattle, people tell you to get Dick's drive-in or drive-through, and those are bad. I mean, those are awful. It's like someone deliberately trying to make a bad hamburger. They're dry. They don't have any sauce in them. They've got them. They're awful. So yeah. Whereas Tokyo, particularly for me, Naughty by Burger in Gokokuji is the best burger I've discovered in Tokyo in a long time. I went back and had that, and the owner remembered me. He's like, "Dude, where you been?" So that was really nice. Although that said, I think that Mamnoon Street is like a Lebanese restaurant actually in Seattle that I would eat at like twice a week. They've got a great lamb burger there with harita fries. It was really good, actually. In fact, Mamnoon is possibly my favorite restaurant in Seattle. Yeah, that was really cool anyway. Firehouse, indeed, in Bunkyoku is best burger you've had anywhere in the world. I tell you what, it's up there. I actually I've found some places I think are better than Firehouse, but Firehouse and Bunkyoku, I know what you're talking about, Hongo Sanchome, is indeed up there. It's a great burger, and it's been around forever. We used to have it back in the days when I worked at a law firm. Like when we'd ever, when you're working late nights, we would order. We'd order Firehouse, and it was awesome. And Tokyo's always had good burgers like that. So Jack, indeed, well said. Um, oh yeah, there's some article where somebody was responding in a press conference, nah, like which was taken as like a cold put down, but I think it can just mean like, yeah, I guess, it can be kind of neutral. Threads has been interesting. I've been on Threads, but Threads still really looks like a text version of it's like Instagram without the pictures. And I do think if they actually try to make it Twitter 2021, where they have third-party integrations, a web interface, GIFs, then it will be interesting. As it is at the moment, it's kind of interesting, but you sort of go on there, and especially when it's mobile only, I don't really know what to do there. So for me, it still is Twitter, but there we go. Chris Broad wrote a book that was interesting. And yeah, I got a few comments back actually when I commented that good to see Japan supporting Ukraine. Some people saying that, hey, nobody should be getting involved in a conflict between two other countries. And I'll just say it right here. It's not a conflict. Ukraine is not a conflict. Ukraine is a mugging. It is Russia, going in, whatever complaints they have about Ukraine, like the idea, and also the notion that NATO is expanding on its own. Its countries are asking to join, and they're asking to join because Russia's invading places. It's not. Finland would not have joined NATO. Sweden would not have joined NATO if Russia didn't go around invading places. And if NATO was expanding, they would have just accepted Ukraine and Georgia when they applied back in 2008. They didn't let them in. They weren't expanding. They did send a positive message because they're sovereign states and they're allowed to join whatever club they want to join. And a club of countries that just would prefer not to be invaded by Russia is a pretty good club to be in right now. So on that, that's total BS, the idea that, NATO's an expansion of US imperialism and that Russia was legitimately provoked. And even if it was legitimately provoked, it still doesn't justify taking a whole bunch of land in Crimea and, Eastern Ukraine. So from that perspective, the idea that Ukraine should be like trying to compromise and negotiate for peace right now based on transfers of land and whatever. No, what should be happening for peace is Russia should just be going home. And thank heavens that the rest of the world, including Japan, is supporting the defense of Ukraine with all sorts of, with aid, but including military aid. And, I don't want to see Russians get killed, but, at the same time, they should go home. It's not. I don't want to see anyone, any country invading any other country. And I didn't support the invasions of Afghanistan or Iraq either. But that's irrelevant to this case as well. In this case as well, so Japan is like one of the Japan's up there with Poland for being pro-Ukraine, and it's one of these things I think the Japanese government is 100% correct on. And I know it's this whole conflict is causing a huge economic burden to the world. And remember, the burden is not just from the sanctions on Russia, it's from the damage being done to Ukrainian grain production, which again is entirely the fault of Russia. And Russia should be punished for it. And, we should be helping countries to defend themselves against while they're in the middle of getting mugged. I mean, having someone getting mugged and instead of going in and helping them, you just hand them a can of mace and say good luck with that is pretty much all that we're doing right now. I think what we're doing for Ukraine is the bare minimum. And it's good to see, although it's taking, it's making slow progress, it's good to see the counteroffensive going well. So, and it's good to see that Japan is supporting that, including, if Ukraine needs to use cluster munitions to clear out, Russian trenches that are dug out on its territory that shouldn't be there, and it's on their own territory. It's not like they're using it to bomb other countries. Let them have them. Let them have whatever they need. I mean, if you're not going to go and actually defend them, which we should be doing, give them the tools that they need to defend themselves. So anyway, that's me. Sachifu, good to see you, Sachifu, back in the chat, back in the banana-shaped island country. It is a banana-shaped island country. And Tokyo bananas are awesome. If you ever come to Tokyo, by the way, what people in Japan do whenever they come to Tokyo is they get Tokyo banana, which is like this sort of custard banana-shaped sponge mini cakes, which you give out to people. People in Korea know about this. Whenever I go to Korea, I always buy a whole box of Tokyo bananas and I hand them out. That's a total squirrel chase there, but that's another thing. You can tell how close the wall behind him indicates the room is super small. It's not that small. I can't touch the wall or anything back there. There's a good bit of depth behind there. It's small. It is small, but it's not that small. Anyway, there's an article this week that there are very few hospitals in Tokyo or Osaka or Japan that offer epidurals. There's an idea for birthing in Japan that it's better to just feel pain. It's better for the baby. There's all sorts of stuff with that, which I've talked about. I've actually even written a long blog about before in the experience of my own child. The Osaka University Hospital, apparently the number of anesthesiologists who are on call able to offer epidurals is apparently so low that they've just decided to stop offering them at one of the only like 3 hospitals or something in Osaka that offer them. In Tokyo, there's only 2 or 3 hospitals that offer them as well. And this is a country where there is a fairly alarming percent of people who die during childbirth. So that was an alarming stat. Another stat that not so much alarming for me, maybe for other people, is that Kishida, after briefly going sort of well in the polls, has now dipped back down toward a majority disapprove, which again, unless he can sort of turn things around and look dynamic and figure out a new policy, mainly the my number kerfuffle seems to be what's undermining trust in the government, which, as I talked about last week, that really isn't the government directly per se, although they've arguably mismanaged the IT project, but it's really Fujitsu that's doing it. That's a thing. Into the comments, we've got Eric Bailey. Cluster munitions are responsible for exceptionally high civilian casualties. So they talk about the dud ratio. So no matter what you think of these war weapons, are almost as bad as landmines in real world use, which are also all over Ukraine. And remember, the Russians are using cluster munitions with dud rates of over 20%. The American ones are still above the 1%. That's, which is the banned level. And those are the weapons that they're giving to Ukraine, but they're about 2%. So, but sure, I mean, Ukraine's got the incentive to clean it up because it's their own territory. So I think that is a case to distinguish. I mean, ideally they wouldn't be using them at all because the Russians would just go home. But if they need persuading going home, and dropping cluster bombs on them helps, then just do it. Make them go home faster. Um, the whole bananas. Yeah, but I get distracted easily, as you know, Sachifu. But thank you for that. Dan H. Apparently, the amount of cash being lost, being the amount of cash being is losing its luster in Japan. 36% of all cash. The amount, right? So now we have an increasing number of contactless transactions. Certainly during COVID, yeah, really sped up the adoption of cards. And it's not even cards, actually. People are not using cards more. What really has stood out in Japan as having been successful is PayPay. And PayPay works where you show a barcode and it's connected directly, it debits your bank account. So there's no credit card being used. Japanese don't trust credit cards. And those have never really caught on. People who have Suica I like to use Suica a lot. It's pretty handy just being able to IC card tap. And of course I use credit cards, but a lot of places that used to only handle cash, rather than switching to accepting Suica IC cards or credit cards, are accepting PayPay. And that happened a lot in a lot of neighborhoods. And I think PayPay is being backed by SoftBank, if I'm not mistaken. It's an Indian, PayTM is an Indian company. But I believe that their PayPay, a sort of subsidiary in Japan, is being pushed by Yahoo, which is owned by SoftBank. And it's been wildly successful. And I agree. The internet payment forms have certainly accelerated, and it's gotten a lot more convenient. I find myself needing to carry cash a lot less in Japan. Wingstar, your favorite omiyage is Hakata Torimon from Fukuoka, hands down. Torimon. What's Torimon? I used to go to Hakata, and they'd have the Hakata Ningyo, the Hakata dolls. That's something I always used to take back for everyone, although you can't really hand out lots of those to everyone. So maybe that's something else. But yeah. Sainted Sir, hiya. It's warm, rainy Sunday morning in NYC. Well, I'm glad it's rainy. I'm hoping that's protecting you from some of the heat and the Canadian fire orange skies as well. Eric Bailey, Ukraine is actively slaughtering their own citizens in Donbass, just as bad as the Russians. I don't think it's just as bad. Well, the Russians have no business being in Ukraine. As simple as that. So, they should just go home. That's pretty much. And sure, I mean, Ukraine is an extremely flawed, quasi-failed state before the invasion. Still doesn't justify Russia invading. Russia should just go home. We deal with all the other problems, on their own after Russia goes home. The fiction about Donbass, and certainly Crimea, was an unjustified land grab, and Donbass was basically, as well, that was all. The Russians admitted that they were there from 2014. That wasn't Donbass fighting for freedom on its own. There were militias there, but that was all Russia just playing its games, the same games that it plays in Moldova and Transnistria, the same games it plays in Abkhazia and Ossetia in Georgia. The same games, it plays everywhere in the former Soviet Union, which it thinks it's entitled to. The only places it doesn't play those games are in Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. And why? Because they joined NATO. And so Russia and those countries, as a result, Russians complained about not being able to, speak Russian there anymore and stuff like that. But, other than that, they're stable. And that's what we should be offering, pretty much anyone who wants it, starting with Georgia and Ukraine. But anyway, DJ Police. So we talked about how with they're requiring now bicycle helmets if you're riding bicycles, including like mamacharis, and nobody's doing it. And so some people said, well, if there's no enforcement, if there's no penalty, then it's not really mandatory. It is mandatory. There is no penalty, but the law is phrased mandatory. And this is kind of how it begins. The famous DJ Police, the police have these sound cars where they've got like a stand on top, like a politician sort of speech basket on top of these police cars where they go around, and they use this for like crowd control in places like Shibuya. They've started going to schools in Saitama telling kids, it's the law, you respect the law, you have to do it, respect my authority. And they are doing that at the moment. So that is the start of the very long gradual road towards actually enforced stuff there. So Wingstar, family just got back from Georgia and Armenia. Lots of Russians in Armenia now. Russians in Georgia pretend they aren't Russian. It's not a good time, not a good look to be Russian. And that's because they know what the Russians are doing. And the idea that this is Russia coming and being heroic in Eastern Ukraine is a bunch of BS. A complicated situation in Armenia, of course, because Russia were the peacekeepers there. But even there, they've kind of given up on that because, again, they're too busy invading another country they shouldn't be invading. Yeah, really interesting this week. Again, seeing Turkey greenlight Swedish NATO membership, and it did make me wonder. It sounds like they're getting F-16s, but it did make me wonder if they're going to get F-35s as well. Let's keep going through. Yeah, Gary Reedy commenting after I said this before he did. He's a Bloomberg correspondent, but the same sort of thing. That the articles really seem to be focusing on the anxiety and the fear aspects of the Fukushima wastewater, which really, contradicts the approach that self-declared responsible media was taking on vaccines. So that was a thing. Oh yeah, this was a thing. A man was jailed twice for an aggregate, I think, something like 42 days, and basically, somebody posted some revenge porn, and they used someone else's identity to post this sort of content online. And they first they arrested him, kept him for 23 days, which is the full time that they could detain him. Then realized it was mistaken identity and let him go. And then someone rearrested him, and then kept him for another 20 days before they let him go. And then they apologized. And didn't see that there was any wrongdoing involved in it, because of course you can. And this is what they do in Japan. They arrest you, they hold you, the police will detain you for up to 23 days just for questioning. No access to lawyer, no phone call to your family to let them know where you are or anything. You're basically kidnapped and disappear for up to 23 days. And if they put pressure on you by telling your family that they arrested you for revenge porn or something like that, this person apparently had his fiance break off the wedding, was fired from his job. He suffered a lot in this case. And police are like, whoopsie. And not only that, they rearrest frequently when they really want to get someone. And this is the thing. Most common law countries, when I learned, in New Zealand, criminal law, and we refer to a lot of other common law countries like US, UK, Canada, Australia, there's a general presumption that if they detain you for more than 72 hours, just the length of detention alone will add an element of duress that can invalidate a confession. How this person didn't just confess just to get out of detention after being effectively kidnapped for 40 days and having his life ruined, it's amazing that he actually held up for that long. People think that you never confess to something that you didn't do. But yeah, there's a lot of data that says that, oh yeah, you would confess to something that you wouldn't do in a situation like that. So, again, another problem in Japan, and where it really needs a lot better controls over police detention powers, because you're going to get a lot of innocent people in jail. So credit to that guy, at least for not confessing through all of that falsely, and wishing that there would be better penalties on the more penalties on the police to sort of restrain that sort of behavior. Former Prime Minister, and I don't think he's self-declared space alien, but his nickname was the space alien, Yukio Hatoyama, who's in the camp along with Yoshio Mori of being pretty pro-Russia, believes that Japan should pivot from being reliant on America and should pivot towards getting energy from Russia and being friendlier with Russia. It's kind of consistently been pro-Russia, and it's kind of repeated. A news story that's it's kind of interesting, went into a rabbit hole of somebody challenging this, that he said that Zelensky had asked for America to carry out a nuclear attack on Russia, to carry out a preemptive nuclear attack on Russia. This was a mistranslated subtitle. Apparently this does originate from an actual thing that was corrected, but where apparently he asked for NATO countries to preemptively attack Russia. He didn't say with nuclear weapons, but he was asking for help and involvement if they were not going to allow Ukraine to attack Russian territory. But anyway, kind of the normal thing that he's kind of retweeting Russian propaganda, which is embarrassing, and stands out in Japan for being fringe in Japan at least. Eric Bailey quotes the classics for police. I must admit, when I was in America, I think I had the songs that you're talking about on my playlist, and I don't know, I just didn't want to get into trouble with the police in America. I don't know. I'm way more scared of the police in America than I am in Japan, I must admit. Even though in Japan they have more powers, I've got more faith that there'll be some sort of degree of reason, which may be misplaced. But America, I didn't want to. I wanted to avoid hospitals and police, and I wasn't successful avoiding hospitals in America, but police, I don't want to mess with those guys. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. Robo taxis are on the way. Full-size Tamiya radio control car was sort of awesome. We're only 5 days ago. I should speed up. We've got like 10 minutes left, so I'm going to speed up. Yeah, Russia. It's kind of funny. Australia. I don't know if there's anyone watching from Australia right now. It looks like Australia's like going to vote against having the voice. I've been reading up on this because I just wanted to understand it. I could be an Australian citizen if I wanted to. My mum's Australian, so I think I can apply for it and get it and be a dual citizen. I've just never been motivated, never had a reason to actually do it. But it's funny how, like, Australia voted against becoming a republic like 20 years ago because they were squabbling over what type of republic to be, and so they just voted against the whole thing. New Zealand voted against having like its own flag. They've still got the British flag, basically, as does Australia. And it's kind of funny. It seems like whenever you let people in New Zealand and Australia vote in a referendum on anything, they just get angry and vote no against whatever it is. I think Aussies would vote no if the question was, do you want to not punch yourself in the face? I think people would vote no. I think they'd find a way to turn that around. The voice is just such a simple, basically no power. It's just an extra body to advise government on making sure policy doesn't do what policy in Australia has always done, which is be extremely discriminatory and racist and unhelpful towards Indigenous people. And people all up in arms saying, oh, it'll be racist to give Aborigines extra protections. Oh, God. That's the worst possible. It's because of the history of extreme racism in Australia that they're talking about having the voice as honestly a token institution to give some meager protection where it's clearly been needed and still is needed. And people are like, oh no, you can't give Aboriginals protections because that would be discriminatory against the rest of Australians. Man, that sounds like my old Japanese boss. Anyway, so that's the thing that happened. Crazy weather forecasts, people collapsing in heat. That was a thing that happened. Threads, please keep trying. Yeah, it's kind of funny. While the investigation into my number is going on, Cornel Taro is going on a tour of mostly Eastern European countries, including Estonia, actually, as well as Finland and other countries on how they became effective digital countries. Which is a good idea, although it does look quite a lot like he's trying to avoid the investigation of the inquiry into the foul-ups with the My Number system. France vetoed NATO. Tokyo wanted to get a NATO office, liaison office set up in Tokyo. It seems like a good idea. I mean, Japan's shipping a bunch of stuff over to Ukraine at the moment, and is looking to normalize its military through increased participation in collective defense, and generally aligned with NATO and most of its objectives. So to have a liaison office in Tokyo kind of seemed like a no-brainer, but for some reason, France vetoed. Again, the idea that NATO is some kind of American imperialist expansion project is just ridiculous. It's delusional Russian propaganda. Noam Chomsky believes that as well, but I think that shows that Noam Chomsky's kind of left the reservation as of late. That's an extremely politically incorrect expression, by the way. But why would France veto having a liaison office for NATO in Japan? Honestly, it's got like the fourth biggest highest military budget of any country in the world. And it's not like France has been meeting its budget commitments to NATO. Why wouldn't they want to be more friends with Japan? Clearly, the answer is they don't want to spook China. They're still hoping to get trade with China. That would be the only thing I can think of as a reason, but there we go. Hachioji hit a record 39.1 degrees the other day, so that was pretty awful. If this levels. Accelerating still 3 days ago. Fukushima fishermen, basically people in Fukushima are just worried about the damage to their livelihoods from the sort of reputational risk from all the hysteria around the wastewater emission, which is frankly justified. And again, where I've said that we should be thinking first about the people in Fukushima and not letting them suffer through reputational damage just through hysterical media coverage. I've had people directly say to me, well, they're the last people that we care about. And that seems to be kind of the attitude, and that's kind of why they're against this. So yeah. Quick look at the comments. As of late, I've probably missed some context there. Remember, if you want me to look at something, do say my name. Good to see DJ Sunnyside up there, by the way. Good to see you. and everybody else. Yeah, remember, if you want to get my attention, say equals Simon. I'm going to crash through. We've got 4 minutes left. Oh yeah, I made a list of all the cars I drove in America. It was just randomly. Um, you're down with TPP? I can't help it. I just think naughty by nature every time I hear someone say TPP. UK is down with TPP. So there we go. Every last Humvee. That doesn't rhyme, but they say it. It's a lyric. So having a lot of conversations about cars, and I drove a lot of cars in America. I thought it'd be good if I try to remember what were all the cars that I drove and how would I rate them, how would I score them. And the conclusion I came to was, while I did love the Teslas, they're a bunch of fun to drive. I still think if I was going to go back and possibly if I would buy, I would probably get the Jeep Wrangler. So yeah. Hey Tico Sam, can I tell you why Vegemite tastes so great? It tastes okay. I don't know. I'm sure you've got a clever answer. So I'll hear your answer, Tico Sam. Good to see you. So anyway, I got the Jeep Wrangler actually as the most fun thing that I drove while I was in America, followed by the Tesla Y3X. I mean, look, if I'm just going purely by fun, the X is more fun than the Y and the 3. But I think for price and for what you get in practicality, the Y is the best out of those. The Corvette C8 was an amazing car. That was looks like a Lambo, drives like a Lambo. Apparently, it was benchmarked against a Ferrari. It's like a 600 horsepower car. It cost $79,000 and it looks like a Lambo. That was an amazing car. In fact, if I had two cars, I'd probably buy a Corvette C8 and a Wrangler just based on my time there. The BMW i8 is an amazing car, but I wish it drove more like a Tesla. Just put an electric engine into it and then the performance will match the looks. The Ford Mustang 5.0 convertible with my rag top down so my hair can blow. If there was a problem, never mind. I drove that in Los Angeles. That was pretty cool. That was a friend let me drive her car. That was really sweet. There's BMW 420i. That was a good car. Toyota Camry, actually, I was super impressed by. And actually, yeah, for like a highway, for a road trip car, that was a really good car. Dodge Charger was another surprisingly fun car. It's basically what all the police cars are in America right now, but yeah, it makes a lot of noise. VW Jetta, actually good car. Mazda CX-5, not so impressed, and Honda HR-V, not so impressed. Those were the cars that I drove in America. DJ Sunny said, did I ever do the self-drive mode? I did with the Tesla. I did a little bit just on the highway, but it was kind of jolting sometimes. Like it'd drift into the, close to the lane line, and then it would jolt back in, and that was kind of freaking me out. And I remembered all those decapitations that have happened in self-driving Teslas, and I put it back in. But I drove for about 2 minutes in full self-driving mode, and yeah, and then I remembered that it's powered by the genius who's running Twitter right now, and then I thought, yeah, you know what, maybe I should drive it myself. I am looking forward to the day of full automated self-driving, but yeah. What can you do? Sachifu, your only complaint about the political correctness of pointing out Noam Chomsky's insanity is the timescale is very generous in terms of when the dementia started. Oh yeah, well, Noam Chomsky is an interesting guy. I was a political science arts major, and you couldn't have a debate without bringing him up, and he makes compelling, arguments. He's good at debating even now. But I do feel like talking about Russia, it's like he's gone from being an idealist to an extreme like Putin apologist, like realist. He's like gone into the Kissinger school all of a sudden, like it's what he's believed all along. And he literally frames this whole thing as a chess game between America and Russia, which is how Russian propagandists want to paint this. But how does that justify invading? So yeah, I agree. I think he's kind of become, I sort of tolerated him because he was interesting for a long time, but lately he's become intolerable for me. But we'll see. 270 AJ. Did I find it hard to drive on the right side of the road? Japan, etc. Left side of the road. There were I had a couple of moments. I had a few things. I was probably even 3 or 4 months in. I'd still walk up to the passenger side of the car to get in. For about a month, when I was going to turn a corner, I'd flip the windshield wipers. There was like only one. There were 2 or 3 minor moments where I'd turn. When you turn left, and you forget you've got to go into the far lane and you go into the near lane, which is into oncoming traffic. I'd say a couple of moments where that sort of happened and I had to correct. I had one moment about a weekend on a major road where I did that, where there were like 3 lanes of traffic coming toward me. And I'm like, why is everyone going the wrong way? And then I realized what I did and I had to back through an intersection. So I had one major incident of driving on the wrong side of the road. Got that out of my system in the first week. I sort of had little echoes of it going out, mostly getting in the wrong side of the car for about like a month or two. By the end, it was pretty normal though. Luckily, I don't really drive um, in uh, in Japan, so there wasn't a lot to adapt to. But there you go. Saint and Sir, they do have terrible aerodynamics and so on, and the windshield is flat. But the one that I drove was a recent model. I think it was a JL, and it was it had surprising power. They just basically decided to brute force the performance thing, and that was the result was that was really fun. I mean, I'm sure it's not fuel efficient. I've heard they're not reliable, but it was a really fun, great car anyway. So I gave out lots of awards for that. On this week's episode of Spider-Man, they simulated a man with a knife coming into a train station where everybody is already sufficiently back and there are safety guards and people with poles standing beside him. And apparently who is paralyzed by a net. So Spider-Man, again, I always think of TV shows in my head when I see stuff like this. And I remember the Electric Company version of Spider-Man where it actually had Morgan Freeman, I believe, singing the theme song. Spider-Man, where are you coming from? Spider-Man, nobody knows who you are. And that's what I hear the whole time. I feel like you could put that music on top of this. Anyway, so yes, the train workers, if this ever happens and the train workers happen to be surrounding him with cattle prods and a net, where then and the person suddenly like loses control of their limbs when they are shot with a net, and I think we're all in good hands at the moment. So good to know. The ban from of China on seafood products from Japan includes landlocked prefectures Gunma, Tochigi, Nagano. They don't have any seafood. It includes Niigata, which is on the opposite side of Japan, which is anywhere near Fukushima, and they include like 2 or 3 prefectures that don't even have coastlines, but China's banning seafood from them. So yeah, good to know. Good to know. Japan granted, a country that only gives like 20 or 30 recognized refugees per year, recognized 114 refugees all at once, and kind of in a way that they were asking for credit for it. But the 114 that they gave it to were all staff of the Japanese embassy in Afghanistan that helped rescue and save the lives of the Japanese staff at the embassy and get them out of the country, and then left them behind for a year. And put them through hell to get out, and then force them to apply for refugee visas. Just give them normal visas. They shouldn't even need, these are people who worked for Japan and whose lives were in danger. Just give them work visas. So claiming credit for giving out 114 refugee visas, good, a drop in the bucket of the 20,000 applications that Japan gets every year. But claiming credit for that is kind of, a bit disingenuous. The rocket engine. Oh, I think I got it on an NHK story up here, but here it is. Japan, the Epsilon rocket. The Epsilon rocket, by the way, is a rocket I've talked about here before, just the same way that the Izumo, totally not an aircraft carrier, the flat deck, which is supposed to be for helicopters, and then Japan bought a whole bunch of vertical takeoff and landing F-35s, and now they're admitting, okay, yeah, it is an aircraft carrier. Not as funny as the Liaoning, which is the Chinese first aircraft carrier, which was actually a former Soviet aircraft carrier that they bought from Ukraine for the purpose of converting into a casino that they then converted into China's first ever aircraft carrier. Not quite as funny, but yes, Japan, talk about dual-use technologies. A rocket that they say is for competing against small like rocket launch providers like Firefly and Rocket Lab and so on. And good that Japan's interested in doing this, but it looks an awful lot like an ICBM. And it's kind of funny while Japan and everyone else is complaining at North Korea developing ICBMs, this isn't an ICBM. It's just a small rocket that launches like 20 to 30 kilogram payloads to anywhere around the world in seconds across continents. Totally not an ICBM. It exploded on an engine test in Akita, and just to be clear, it wasn't supposed to explode. Because it's not an ICBM. It's totally just a small rocket, and there it goes. So that's a thing that happened. You know what? Damn, we're over time, and we didn't even get to the topics I picked for the title. We are already over time. So this was an interesting one that got some debate this week. Some thoughts on this one. Somebody in America posted, why does Japan have so few homeless? Like on the scale, percentage of population. New Zealand is the highest percent. at least taken from a 2013 number. In Japan, 2019 has a small number. And I don't know anything about this, but there was a very good response to this, which I shared later on. This person who's worked with several homeless organizations, and I'll just share this tweet because it's a good tweet and it's informed, and I am not. This person who's worked with homeless organizations over the year, first priority is to help them get work and together with housing, and Japan has an enormous advantage. Oh, it's not loading. Pointed out that Japan's got a lot of spare housing, a lot of means of sort of finding work for people, and the other advantage is that unlike countries like America, where it's not dealing with this huge drug addiction problem, there are problems with alcohol and other forms of chemical addiction, but no big drug addiction problem like America has, which was definitely a huge factor. And what I heard about Seattle was there's this big project to build lots of housing for homeless people, and they found out that just building housing without dealing with mental health and drug addiction meant that the situation did not improve in Seattle, and arguably just not having a fentanyl epidemic in Tokyo is probably also a big factor. Mental health is another complicated thing. It's clearly a factor, but how Japan is dealing with it better is not entirely clear to me. But yeah, I think the biggest differentiator from my impression, having just been in America, is that you don't have the crazy drug problems that you have over there. And I think that's it. I'm just going to flip through to the end. So, yeah, Eric Bailey, by and large, the police here are useless. Remember that when that bear ran into Sapporo, the police had to wait for the hunter Oyaji to show up and take it down. Well, in America, of course, they'd just get a tank or something and fire at it with a cannon. But it sounds like they did the responsible thing, getting actual licensed bear hunters. DJ Sunny Side Up, you made a short about the benefits of sun umbrella. Do I use sun umbrellas? I do not. I probably should, but I do not use sun umbrellas. I like the sun, and 98% of people in Tokyo have a vitamin D deficiency in spite of the sun, just because it's so harsh. So I try to maximize getting as much sun as I can. I actually had more sun. It's crazy. I had more sun coming back from Seattle than I've had since I got back here, just because you're indoors all the time. I'm 8 minutes over as usual, but thank you everybody for keeping me company. Lots of great comments tonight. Great to see participation. We've got 18 viewers, 13 likes. Remember, if you liked, please like. It's all that I'm doing this for. I've not monetized this video. You can see there's no ads. I do this literally for likes and peanuts. Yeah, it was great seeing Aaron, and I must admit, I would like to do another Tokyo meetup. I felt a bit rushed trying to get one in before I went away. So, and there's some people, I must admit, that made me realize, especially post-pandemic, there's some people around Tokyo who I haven't met that I'd love to meet. So, yeah, I'll definitely do something like that again. But in the meantime, stay safe, hydrate if you're in the Northern Hemisphere, and rug up if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, because it's cold down there. Have a good week, everybody. Take care. I'll see you all next week. Remember, follow me on Twitter. Follow me on Threads as well if you're on there, although honestly, there still isn't a lot happening on there. So follow me on Twitter. You can join the conversation, maybe be in next week's show. And boom, peace. Have a good one. Thank you, Jack H. See you later. Any string. Boom.